I never believed in creatures from folklore until one saved my life. My name is Michael Harris. I'm a 32-year-old high school biology teacher from Portland. And what happened to me in the Cascade Mountains of Washington completely shattered everything I thought I knew about reality. This is the account of how I got lost in one of America's most remote wilderness areas, found myself hunted by a deadly predator, and was rescued by something that shouldn't exist. I've always been a rational, scientifically minded person. I grew up hiking with my parents throughout the Pacific Northwest, and by my 20s, I had logged hundreds of nights camping in various wilderness areas. I'm Wilderness First Responder certified. I know how to read topographical maps and use a compass, and I've dealt with challenging situations before, including encounters with black bears and getting caught in severe weather. I'm telling you this so you understand I'm not some inexperienced novice who panics at the first sign of trouble. That confidence in my abilities is actually part of what got me into trouble. In late September, I decided to take a week off work for a solo backpacking trip through a remote section of the Cascades. I'd been planning it for months, studying maps, checking weather forecasts, and carefully assembling all my gear. The forecast looked perfect with clear skies and mild temperatures. I packed my 60-liter backpack with everything I needed, including my tent, sleeping bag, first aid kit, water purification system, 5 days of food, extra clothing, and importantly, my emergency satellite communicator that could send my GPS coordinates to rescue services. I gave detailed information about my planned route to my best friend Jennifer, including my trailhead, planned campsites, and expected return date. I told her if she didn't hear from me by 6 o'clock on the 5th day to contact the park rangers. I also filed a backcountry permit. I felt completely prepared. The first day went exactly according to plan. I started hiking at 8:30 in the morning, and the weather was absolutely perfect. The trail wound through magnificent old-growth forest with massive Douglas firs and western red cedars towering overhead. I made excellent time and reached my planned campsite by mid-afternoon. I set up my tent near a small creek, purified some water, ate dinner, and fell asleep feeling satisfied with how smoothly everything was going. The second day started well too. I broke camp and continued along the established trail, climbing gradually in elevation. The views were spectacular. But around noon, something went wrong. I came to a section where the trail seemed to fork in a way that didn't match my map. There was what looked like a more worn path heading off to the right and a fainter trail continuing straight ahead. My map showed the trail continuing straight, but the right fork looked more established. I studied the map for several minutes, trying to figure out which way was correct. I finally decided to follow what I thought was the main trail, heading right. That decision was my first mistake. Within an hour, I realized something was off. The trail was becoming less defined, and the terrain didn't match what I expected from my map. I stopped and pulled out my compass and map again, trying to figure out exactly where I was. But the more I studied the map, the more confused I became. Nothing around me seemed to correspond to the features I was seeing on paper. I backtracked to try to find where I had made the wrong turn, but after hiking back for what felt like the right amount of time, I couldn't find the fork. Everything looked different going the opposite direction. I kept hiking back and forth, trying to find something recognizable, but I was just getting more disoriented. By late afternoon, I had to accept the frightening reality that I was genuinely lost. I tried to stay calm and think rationally. I found a small clearing and decided to set up camp while I still had daylight, rather than continuing to wander aimlessly. I knew the basic survival rule was to stay put once you realize you're lost, but part of me resisted that idea because I felt like I should be able to figure this out on my own. I was an experienced hiker. I had maps and a compass. How could I possibly be this confused? But the truth was, I had no idea which direction would lead me back to established trails. That night, I barely slept. lying in my tent listening to every sound in the forest and wondering how I had gotten myself into this situation. The third day, I decided to try using my satellite communicator to call for help. I pulled the device from my pack, extended the antenna, and pressed the SOS button. The device indicated it was attempting to acquire satellites and send the emergency signal. I waited 15 minutes, but the device kept showing it was trying to transmit without confirming the message had been sent. I tried again multiple times throughout the morning, but couldn't get confirmation that my distress signal had gone through. Either the forest canopy was too thick, or the surrounding mountains were blocking the signal. I couldn't tell if my calls for help were reaching anyone. Without confirmation, I had to assume I was still on my own. I decided I needed to try to find my way out, rather than just waiting. I studied my compass and decided to head northwest, reasoning that I would eventually hit a road or established trail if I maintained a consistent direction. I started hiking through the forest, trying to move in as straight a line as possible. But the terrain was incredibly difficult. I had to constantly detour around dense thickets, steep ravines, and fallen trees. Every detour threw off my bearing. By afternoon, I was exhausted, scratched up from pushing through brush, and no closer to finding help. I made camp that night in a small hollow, ate one of my dehydrated meals, and tried not to think about how much trouble I was in. The fourth day was when things got truly frightening. I was hiking through a particularly dense section of forest when I first felt like I was being watched. It was just an instinct, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, but it was strong. I stopped and looked around but couldn't see anything unusual. I continued hiking, but the feeling persisted and grew stronger. Then I heard something moving through the brush parallel to my path. Whatever it was large. I caught glimpses of tawny brown through the trees. My heart sank as I realized what it probably was: a mountain lion. I had encountered black bears before, but never a cougar, and I knew they were far more dangerous. Mountain lions are ambush predators that hunt by stalking their prey and attacking from behind. Everything I had ever read about cougar encounters rushed through my mind. Don't run, make yourself look big, make noise. But I was exhausted, injured, and carrying a heavy pack. I was perfect prey. I tried to stay calm and keep moving, periodically turning around to look behind me. The cougar continued to follow, sometimes visible through the trees, sometimes hidden. This went on for hours. The cat was clearly sizing me up, waiting for the right moment to attack. I was terrified, but I kept hiking, kept making noise, kept trying to appear dangerous and difficult to take down. But I could feel the cat's patience. It knew I was getting weaker. It knew I would eventually make a mistake or simply collapse from exhaustion. By late afternoon, I was approaching complete panic. My legs were shaking from fatigue. My water was running low. The mountain lion was still there, still following, and I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. That's when I first saw the Sasquatch. I had stopped in a small clearing to catch my breath when I heard a sound unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was a vocalization, loud and powerful, somewhere between a roar and a howl. It echoed through the forest and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The mountain lion immediately bolted, crashing through the underbrush in the opposite direction. Whatever had made that sound had frightened away a predator that had been stalking me for hours. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, as something massive moved through the trees ahead of me. Then I saw it. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a creature at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, with a face that was simultaneously ape-like and disturbingly human. It was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, a creature that every rational part of my mind insisted could not exist. But there it was, as real as the trees around me, watching me with intelligent, dark eyes. I should have been terrified, but I was beyond terror, beyond any normal reaction. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and in shock. I just stood there staring at this impossible creature. The Sasquatch stared back at me for what felt like forever, an eternity. Then it did something that made absolutely no sense. It gestured with one massive arm, a clear indication that I should follow it. The gesture was so deliberately communicative, so obviously intelligent, that I found myself responding automatically. I took a few tentative steps forward. The Sasquatch turned and began walking through the forest, and without really thinking about what I was doing, I followed. I followed the Sasquatch through the forest for what must have been several hours, though I had lost all sense of time. The creature moved with incredible grace despite its size, navigating through dense undergrowth and over rough terrain with ease. It would periodically stop and look back at me, clearly checking to make sure I was still following. I was moving on autopilot, too exhausted and confused to question what was happening. Eventually, the Sasquatch led me to a small rocky overhang that formed a natural shelter. The creature gestured toward the sheltered area, and I understood it wanted me to rest there. I stumbled into the shelter, dropped my pack, and collapsed. I must have passed out from exhaustion, because the next thing I remember was waking up hours later in complete darkness. My body ached, and I was disoriented and confused about where I was. Then I remembered the Sasquatch, and I felt a surge of fear, wondering if I had dreamed the whole encounter. But I could hear something moving outside the shelter, something large, breathing rhythmically. I fumbled for my headlamp and turned it on. The beam illuminated the massive form of the Sasquatch sitting just outside the rocky overhang, apparently keeping watch. The creature looked at me calmly when the light hit it, showing no aggression or fear. It was protecting me. The realization was overwhelming. This creature that shouldn't exist was guarding me through the night. I must have drifted in and out of consciousness, because the next thing I clearly remember was early morning light filtering into the shelter. The Sasquatch was still there, now standing and looking intently in a particular direction. The creature turned to me and made that same gesture, indicating I should follow again. I struggled to my feet, my body stiff and painful, gathered my pack, and followed. The Sasquatch led me through the forest with apparent purpose, moving in a specific direction. After perhaps an hour of hiking, I began to hear something in the distance. Voices, human voices. The Sasquatch had led me to other people. The creature stopped at the edge of a dense section of forest and gestured forward one more time. I understood. It had brought me as close as it was willing to come to other humans. I looked at the Sasquatch, and even through my exhaustion and confusion, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This creature had saved my life. It had frightened away the mountain lion, provided me shelter, protected me through the night, and led me to rescue. I wanted to say something, to express my thanks, but I had no idea if the creature could understand human speech. I just looked into those intelligent eyes and hoped it could sense my gratitude. The Sasquatch held my gaze for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the forest without a sound. I stumbled forward through the trees and emerged onto an established trail. There were 3 hikers standing there, a couple and another man, all looking startled by my sudden appearance. I must have looked terrible, scratched, dirty, and probably half delirious. They rushed over to help me, and I tried to explain that I'd been lost, but the words came out garbled and confused. They gave me water and food, and one of them had a satellite phone that actually worked from that location. Within 2 hours, a park ranger helicopter had located us, and I was being airlifted out. The rangers and later the hospital staff asked me repeatedly how I had survived 4 days lost in the wilderness and how I had found my way back to the trail. I told them I must have gotten lucky, that I had kept walking and eventually stumbled onto the established trail. I didn't mention the mountain lion. I definitely didn't mention the Sasquatch. Who would believe me? Even I was questioning whether it had really happened or if I had hallucinated the whole encounter due to exhaustion and dehydration. But I knew it was real. The scratches on my arms from pushing through brush were real. The dehydration and exhaustion were real. And the Sasquatch was real. That was 5 years ago. I've had a long time to think about what happened and to decide what it means. I know some people reading this will assume I'm lying, or that I misidentified something, or that I was hallucinating. I can't prove what happened. I have no photographs, no physical evidence, nothing but my testimony, but I know what I experienced. I know what I saw. A Sasquatch saved my life. It chose to intervene when it could have simply remained hidden. It showed compassion and intelligence and made a deliberate decision to help a human in distress. The experience completely changed how I view the world. I'm more open to possibilities now, more willing to admit I don't have all the answers. When my students ask me whether something exists, I'm more likely to respond with uncertainty rather than absolute conviction, because I've learned that certainty can be shattered in an instant when reality presents you with something you were certain was impossible. I think about that Sasquatch often. I wonder if it's still out there in those mountains. I wonder if it has helped other lost hikers. I hope it understands how grateful I am. The world is bigger and stranger than most people realize, and there are mysteries still living in the deep forests. I learned that through direct experience. Sometimes the most frightening creatures turn out to be saviors. The Sasquatch stepped out of legend into my reality, saved my life, and disappeared back into the wilderness. That's what happened, believe it or not, but I know the truth.